Hello, this is Blaster Toad here, and welcome to part 1 of the Spline Constrained Platformer tutorial. This is going to be a from-scratch tutorial showing you take right from nothing to the finished product. Well, system complete project. We aren't going to make it look pretty, we're not making a game to publish. We're going to be making a group of systems that you could then skin out to be a functional game with a bit more level building and all that fun stuff. So, for you newbies out there, y'all gotta start somewhere, right? Well, I'm expecting you to start with the Epic Launcher installed and a version of Unreal installed. When I'm making this tutorial, the most recent version, without being a preview, is 4.24.3, which is what we're going to be working in. I'm gonna launch this here. Creating a new project. We're going to choose a game type project. This is going to be completely blank. We're not going to be working with any templates. This will be a blueprint only project, and we're going to call this Platformer Tut 2020. There we go. My nice, unique name. Yay. Sorry, just position myself in the chair here if you hear some creaks and cracks. Okay, so now we got our project open. Clicking this little flippy-doo here in the corner is going to show us our file tree. Gonna right-click on Content, add a new folder for Blueprints. Gonna do the same thing on Blueprints, is right-click, new folder, and have a folder for our player. Okay. We are going to get a few objects ready, or a few actors ready for us here. We're gonna do a new Blueprint class, a new Blueprint actor, or character, sorry. I'm gonna call this character, the char underscore player. Sorry, little sneezes there. And then I'm gonna right click Blueprint class, add an actor. We're gonna call this one Spline Track. And then another Blueprint class, actor, player, camera. Okay. Now, we are going to set up some input before we get started with actually adding logic here. So we're going to go to Edit, Project Settings. Within Project Settings, we're going to go to Input, Axes Mappings. Axes Mappings is going to give us a scale. Our scale is going to be -1 to 1 for backwards or forwards. We're going to name this Move. And our forward axes, forward in this case going to be our right axes. I'm going to set up D as an input. I'm going to set up A as an input. A being -1 to move to the left. And then I'm also going to set up right as in the right key, and left as in the left key. And when I'm saying right and left keys, I am referring to the arrow keys. And left will also get a -1. Then action mappings, we're going to add one of those, and this is a button press. It'll give us a press or release instead of a scale. We're going to have one called jump. We're going to set up W and up. And, oh, not that. I'm going to do another plus here, and space. Just lets us play with the controls a little bit more fluidly. Okay, and now we can close that. And open up our character player. We're going to start here. So, welcome to our character. Our character, we're going to give it a basic body. So add component, big green button here in the corner. Add a cube. I'm going to hit R to scale. I'm going to grab it right in the middle and scale it down. I'm going to grab it on the Z axis and scale it up. What a nice character we have. Isn't that beautiful? Everything can be a cube in game design. I'm then going to click the capsule component, the root of our character, and add a... Actually, I'm not going to add it. I'm not going to add a camera here. I was about to add a camera, but we're going to do that in the other actor. So, hey, we've got a character. Awesome. Now, selecting event graph, we'll be building some logic here, but to keep things nice and clean, I'm going to, beside graphs here, hit new graph, and make one for input. It's going to kick us over there, as you can see, and we'll start building our input events here. So we're going to have move. I'm going to scroll down until we find move, or scroll up. We're going to type in move axes then. There we go, an axes event for move. That's what we're looking for. And we're going to come down here a bit, right click, and jump. And there's our action event jump. For our move, we are going to get actor forward vector. And then we are going to pull off here, release, and add movement input. Right click and straighten on the pin there to make everything line up nice. Gonna bring our axis value into scale, our forward vector into world direction. Compiling and saving. Then for jump, we just want to pull off here and hit jump. Straighten that up, compile and save. So there is our basic movement. Now we are going to go over to event graph. We're going to, on event begin play, we are going to get controller. And then we're going to right click. Oh, sorry, not. We're going to pull off there and we're going to cast to player controller right there. So this is making sure that what's coming in here is a player controller and is not a AI controller, for example. We're going to then right click on this player controller output and we're going to promote to variable and we're going to call this player controller. Straighten pins, pull that back, so we've just got a reference to it. We're then going to spawn actor from class. This is going to put another item in our world, and that class is going to be camera. We've got the camera actor. No, we want, where's the one we made? Player camera, right there. Our spawn transform is going to be our get actor transform. Just gonna match whatever our player is in at. Put that right in there. Our instigator. We don't need to set any of those up. Those are all optional anyway. Then off our return node, we are going to float our player controller, get player controller, and we are going to set view target with blend. Right click straighten, and our new view target is going to be our camera. Gonna straighten that node off there, bring those back a bit. And with blend time 0, it's going to go immediately there. Perfect. I'm gonna grab these, pull them down, gonna drag over all of this, and hit C. And I say on begin play, save ref, the reference, to player controller, and spawn and set camera. Or let's do then spawn and set camera. The double and would eventually annoy me. And we're gonna drag those borders in a bit to make it nice and tidy. Compile and save, and that makes a new camera when we spawn into the world. Awesome. And our input we have set up there. Cool. Let's go to our camera. We go to player camera, double click on that. We are going to add a, let's add component, and then I'm going to add a spring arm. And then I'm going to rotate that spring arm, so setting E to rotate, 90 degrees on the Z-axis. And then maybe 20 degrees on the Y-axis. I'm going to, up here, go from object-oriented mode to world reference mode for my widget. I'm gonna drag it up in the air a little bit. So let's take it like 50 up on the Z-axis. And then with spring arm selected, I'm going to add component. And I'm gonna type in camera and add a camera. And it'll add right to the end there. And I can compile and save. What should happen is when we control our player, it'll make a player camera and tell it to use this camera. To get our player character to spawn, we're going to go over to Edit, Project Settings. We're then going to choose Maps and Modes, the game mode here. For select game mode, well, we can't set anything, and that's just no good. So we are going to, under Blueprints, right click, new folder, and I'm going to start this one with an underscore, just because I like it to be the first thing in my list. Modes and instance, I'm going to call this. And in here I'm going to right click, Blueprint class, I'm going to do a game mode based. I'm going to call this GM underscore spline platformer. Just like that. A game mode runs with your level. So whenever a level is loaded in, your game mode is loaded. And it is going to handle some setup stuff. So it will, if you use these player starts, it will spawn players into the player starts for each player that joins and do some other handling like that. It's also a very good place to put rules of your game. So like how to score and things like that. So now we're going to go back to Edit up in the corner. And Project Settings. We're going to go to Maps and Modes again. And instead of Game Mode Base, we're going to choose GM underscore Spline Platformer, the one that we just made. Our default pawn class, so this is the character type it's going to, or the pawn, but what your player is going to use when they load in, we're going to set that to character player. Close. And now if we hit play, our character player should come in here, and then we should be looking at their side from a camera. No? Maybe? Oh! Haha! Do any of you know what's happening? Because I know what's happening. Let's go back to our player folder and open up player camera. We're going to choose our spring arm. The spring arm is a handy little thing, so that if a wall comes like right here, instead of your camera poking through your wall, your camera will move along that arm to be in front of the wall. Well, here's the problem. Our character spawns right here, and the camera then wants to be inside our character. So we're gonna move this off to the side. If I say like 60 on the y-axis, we're gonna save. And then instead of going back to our editor window over here, when we're in a blueprint like this, if we hit play, it'll play in the background, or we can hit this handy little down arrow and choose new editor window. And you can see we are now spawning and our camera's looking at the side, and we can move and we can jump. Everything that we've set up. Woo! Okay. Now on our character, we are going to add a function. The function right over here, we're going to do plus, and we're going to call this switch splines. Or no, let's not switch splines, let's rename enter spline. I like that better. And then on enter spline, we're gonna have a couple inputs. So we're gonna do a plus. We're gonna call this spline track. And under the type, we are going to put in spline component, and it will be a reference to a spline component. Then if we hit plus again, it's gonna make another one of those. We wanna call this camera track. Compile and save. If you haven't closed your camera, you can just switch to it using the nice little tabs here. Otherwise, going out and double clicking to open, we're gonna go to our player camera. We want to add a variable on here, and we want to call this variable spline track. We want to make that a spline component. Object reference, perfect. And then we're going to do the same thing on our character player. We're going to add a variable spline track. And we are going to do a spline component. Compile and save. Okay. The other thing we want to do is go back to our event graph on our player. We're going to move our set target view down a little bit. And we're going to, on our spawn actor camera, we're going to right click, promote to variable, and call this player camera, and plug it all in there. Compile and save. We're saving a reference to our player camera, and the reason we want to do that is we want to, on our player camera, where are you? Oh yeah, we want to be on our enter spline camera track. We want to pull out get player camera, and then we want to set spline track to this. Compile and save. Okay. What else do we want to do here? Then on our spline track, not the camera track, but this spline track input, we're going to do a bit of a thing that we're going to need in the near future here. So we're going to get our spline track, and we're gonna pull spline track here for our character, and we're gonna set spline track. So we've set it on our character, and we've set it on our camera. And then for the spline track, we want to find input key. So find input key closest to world location. And our world location is going to be our actor location. Get actor location, just like that. Oops. Plug that in. With that float value coming out, we want to floor. So move it to an integer, but the lowest integer, we're always rounding down. Then from there, on our spline tracks, we're going to pull one of those out, get spline track, and do a get distance along spline at point, and our point is going to be there, and then we want to do a plus integer +1. We want to click here and copy, so Control C, Control V, and get distance along spline at spline point. We're gonna straighten that off. Do we move this all down? Sure. Straighten that there. Move these back a bit. Move this up. Straighten it off here. There we go. That looks legible enough. We are then going to, from find input key closest world location, we're going to minus a float, and then we're going to plug in our +1. It gets turned into a float, and we're going to straighten that off. The other thing we're going to do is on this line, we're going to double click it. It'll give us a rewrote node, and we're going to move that back here like that and straighten, just so it keeps everything nice and readable at a glance. We can see where everything is going. We are then going to get this minus this times this, and then this minus that. Okay, and this should be our character's distance on that spline, which is what we're trying to figure out. So I want to straighten to the negative where we're going into the A, and I want to straighten to there, and move that back. Cool, something like that. And then we're going to make a new variable, and we're going to call this distance along spline, or just distance on spline, let's call it. Distance on spline. We're going to change that to a type float. We're going to pull it out and set. Plug these into each other. Right click, straighten, and then plug this in here. Should be our distance on spline. So this whole bit here, clear as mud, right? Well, all I know is that it should work for what we want it to do. which I'll be sharing with you all in just a moment here. Or it'll become clear in just a moment. Yeah, we're gonna clean that up. And we're gonna drag over everything. We're gonna hit C to comment. And I'm just gonna make sure it overlaps everything. So this here is update referenced spline find actors distance along new spline. Okay, so we're getting a spline in, and we're finding how far along that spline we are. I compile and save. Okay. Now, yep, now we're going to go to our event graph. And on our event graph, we're going to actually, let's do our input first, because it might make more sense. So we're going to go to our input, and after we add movement, we are going to get velocity, and then get the length of that velocity, vector length, and we're going to multiply that velocity by a scale. Actually, we're going to do scale by velocity by world seconds. And then we are going to get our distance along spline plus that, and then at that point we are going to set distance on spline. Gonna plug those all in together, and what this is doing is, as we add movement, we are adding velocity. The velocity is then calculated on the next tick, so the next frame of the game, and then with that information we'll add distance along a spline, and then we're going to be in a moment setting our actor to that distance. But before we do all that, we're going to want to get the spline track and do is valid with a question mark to give us this nice little executable one. I'm going to plug that in. We're going to straighten. I'm going to move this down. Straighten that. Plug that in. And we're going to comment this section. So drag over it, hit C. If spline is valid, add distance along spline. Or move along spline. So if spline is valid, move along spline. I'm going to compile and save. And then on our event graph on tick, we're going to get the spline track. We're going to do is valid again. It's only happening if the spline track is set. We want to get location at distance. Our distance, we want to get distance and plug in there. We want this to be in world space, and then we're going to right click on that vector and hit split. We then want to get actor location. We're going to right click and split it as well, and then we're going to right click over here and make vector. What we're doing is we're taking the XY, the forward and backward, side to side of the spline, but keeping the value of our character. Just like that. And then we are going to set actor location. Straighten that off. Plug in new location. And we want teleport to be true, so it would take any physics movements with it. So if we're falling or if we are jumping, that comes with it. Okay. Then we want to do something very similar, but with rotation. So we're going to get our spline track, get rotation. No, we are going to get direction at distance along spline, and this will give us a vector out. We could do rotation, but I want to change it up a bit. And get our distance on spline. We want this in world space. Now what we want to do with this is we want to make rot, so make a rotation from Z and X. And X will be our direction, and Z will be get actor up vector. And then we are going to set actor rotation, right click and straighten, and set that right there. And again, we want it to teleport physics, straighten, and then we're gonna move these down a bit. We're gonna select everything here and hit C to comment. If spline is valid, set location and rotation of character along spline. Or maybe not along, but following spline. There we go. We're gonna compile and save. So that's setting our location and rotation along the spline. That is making our camera. Actually, we do want to set owner to, so this is on our spawning of the player camera. I'm going to right click and type in self. So the owner will be this player. We're going to compile and we're going to save. Okay. Now we're going to move to our camera. We're going to go to our event graph. We're going to get rid of everything but tick. And on tick, we're going to get our spline track. We're doing is valid. And then if it is valid, we are going to find location closest to world location And our world location is going to be get owner, get location. So get actor location. This is going to be the location of our owner, which is the player pawn. We want to get that in world space. And then we want to set actor location. And this one should never be running physics, so we don't need to teleport, and we'll just straighten this up. We'll hit C. We'll call this follow player owner along spline. Okay. Compile and save. Now, let's actually deal with our spline. We go to our spline. We are going to add a component. We're going to add a spline component. And I'm going to drag that to the root. So that is now the basis of our thing. I'm then going to add a component. I'm going to add a box collision. I'm going to call this spline start. And I'm going to right click and duplicate spline end. Okay, we're going to go to the event graph. Don't think we need any of this here, but what we will need is if we click spline start and we scroll down in here and we want to do an on component begin overlap. Boom, and it's going to give us this node. The other actor, we want to cast to character underscore player. So we're going to make sure that whatever comes into that box when it starts overlapping is a character. And then, or sorry, as is a player, and then as a player, we want to, what did we call it? Did we call it update or did we call it enter spline? We're going to straighten that off. Spline track is going to be spline. Camera track is going to be a little bit more complicated. So we are going to, on spline, right click, no, we don't want to duplicate it there because we want it just to be a variable. We're going to do a new variable. We're going to call this camera spline. And we're going to put an eyeball on it by clicking that little eyeball there. Open it up. And that means it is editable from outside the blueprint. And then we're going to make that a type of spline track. And we're going to get an object reference. We're going to pull that out of here. We're going to do an is valid. But instead of doing the question mark, we're going to do the function, which gives us a boolean. A boolean is a yes or a no, a true or a false. So camera spline, true or false, we want to do select. I'm going to straighten. So if camera spline is valid, true, we want to get spline component. If I type in component, it'll be too much, so get spline. You want to scroll all the way to the bottom and get the spline. No, I wanted get, not set. Get spline. All the way to the bottom, get spline. There we go. And that will go in true. But if it's false, we want to use this spline. And we're going to move this down a bit. And we're going to hit C. If camera spline is set. Use external spline. And we want to bring this up here, and we want to plug this into camera track. I'm going to compile and save. So what this does is when a player walks into a box, and say, hey, you're entering a new spline. You're entering this spline for your spline track, and your camera should use either a different spline or this one. Okay. And then what we want to do is on spline end, again, scroll down, on component begin overlap, and then we just want to copy this bit and paste it. Just like that. And then for camera actor, well, we're just going to move this up close enough that we can pull that in as well. Just like that. Compile and save. If it enters either end, it will do this. Cool. Now we're going to save. Yep, I think that's all we need to do for that. Yeah. Now what we want to do is on construction script. So construction script works as you update an actor. So we are going to do a couple things here. So we are going to do a branch. And we're going to straighten that branch. And we are going to promote to variable. We're going to call this manual update. Pull that down. And then we're going to set manual update to false if it is true. Then with that, we want to pull off the spline here. Get spline. And then we're going to get location at spline point. Straighten those, and we're going to get the world location. And then we want to copy that, paste, and then we want to spline, get points, get number of spline points, -1 to get the last spline point, index, not its number, but its index, because an index starts at 0, whereas the numbering starts at 1. If it's counting for a number of something, it'll go 1, 2, 3. But if we're setting an index of something, it goes 0, 1, 2 for the same amount of things. Okay. We're going to get those. Then we also want to get direction. Get direction at spline point. Again, world. And then we're going to multiply that by a float. And that float, we're going to promote to a variable, and we're going to call this collision offset. I'm gonna get this plus vector this. So what this is doing is getting our location and then moving that location along our spline by a preset number. I'm going to do the same thing over here. We'll get our spline, get direction at spline point. Our index will be the same. We want world space. The difference is here, when we multiply by a float, we want to multiply that float by another float, and we want -1 times our collision offset. So this way it moves backwards. And the idea behind this is to have the boxes inset from the ends of the spline. We're going to add vector plus, or sorry, not multiply, add vector plus vector. And then we are going to get spline end, set world location, and then same thing. Over here, we are going to get spline start and set world location. We're gonna double click here for a reroute node. Straighten again, and we want to plug faults into it. And the reason we're doing this is if we are moving the actor around. Okay, so if we're actually moving around the main body of this spline track, it will run this update. However, if we decide just to move around the, like adding spline points or that, or if we decide to rescale these boxes in our level, it will not update it. We're gonna have a manual switch to do so. I'm gonna plug this in all the way down there. We're gonna hit right click, straighten, get all this, move it up, straighten this. Okay, and we're going to drag over all this, and we're gonna drag over all this and comment on, or update overlap boxes, or update trigger boxes to ends of spline plus or minus offset. And we may not want to call this collision offset. Actually, yeah, collision offset makes sense for the collision boxes. So we're gonna compile and save. So now, what we'll have is an empty level. But I'm gonna come out here and I'm gonna scale the floor by say maybe 5 and 5. Our character comes in right here. Well, we're gonna drop a spline track right underneath him there. Bring it up in the world sum. Okay. We're gonna get the end of that spline, hit Alt and drag, and it makes a new spline point. And see, the bottom of our spline comes with it. We're gonna move these handles in because they scale stupidly with it. And then an issue we'd have is if we tried to butt two splines up against each other. You see how this box, the spline point is in the middle of it? Well, if a character hits, okay, so where a character comes and it hits here, it's going to find a distance closest to it along the spline, which is going to be over here. And it's going to, boop, teleport. And it's going to cause some really nasty hitching. So what we can do now is if we select our spline actor, we have in here somewhere, oh, we set camera spline, but we want to double click on here. We want to set collision offset to visible. Compile, save. And then with that collision offset now visible, we can say, okay, set that to 100. And it's now 100 back from either end. Or we could say maybe something like 50. But this gives us some overlap at the end of our splines. And then that way, when we try to join two up together, the actor's always coming in onto the spline and not teleporting into the end of it. We're going to pull this back so that when our actor spawns, he is hitting that though. Come on. Actually, we might not want that here. We may want to actually move it so that he'll move into it, because then he'll hit the spline box, right? So we're going to move this past our actor. We're going to set that to more like a 100 spline offset. Yeah, that should do it. 200 for good measure. So he'll move in, he'll hit that. And now we're going to continue making, so with clicking on a spline point, hitting Alt, we can then move our spline points around. So our actor should come in on here and then move around here and stop at its end. And just to show where that is, we're going to put a cylinder right here so we know where we're going to be moving around. And to signify the end, we're going to put a square. Now if we play and we move, we're moving around and we stop. And if we try to go backwards, we get all screwed up because some reason. Because we're trying to enter in onto the same spline. Okay. How do we fix that? Well, we fix that by being on a different spline, and that would be the point of it, right? But what we'll do is on our spline track, we go back to our event graph, and we're going to get our character, and we're going to get spline track. And then we're going to see if that is equal to spline. Or, let's say, is it not equal to spline? We're then going to run a branch. And we're just going to move this section down. What we're now doing is we're checking, okay, are they already on, or sorry, let's rephrase that. Are they not on this spline track? If they are not on this spline track, enter spline. However, if they are on this spline track, do absolutely nothing because they're already all set up. And we're going to Control C, Control V, move those guys down, move this on up, compile and save, and now we should be able to move along here and move backwards along here. He gets stuck a little bit at the ends. He doesn't like being on the ends. But that's okay. When he gets to the ends, he has no velocity. Because it's trying to set to that end point, so he kind of sticks to the ends a little bit. But that would be fixed by by looping it onto a new spline track. So let's test this now. So if we take our spline track, and instead of having 200, we do like 150 offset. Okay, that seems reasonable. I'm gonna grab this end, hit Alt to drag in, because I want a straight section there. And same off the beginning, I'm gonna hit Alt and drag in. Oop, crap. So I'm gonna drag back apparently on that one. So we've got two straight sections. And then going to Control C, Control V. I'm going to move this and then hit E to rotate. Rotate it 180 around. And we want to butt these basically up against each other. Like that. So we should now be able to move along here, get to here, and then keep on moving along here. And vice versa. And then I go to Control C, Control V, move that down here, and let's hit play. Woo! Why? Oh. Ah, that is why. So I need to walk into one of these boxes, is the issue. So I'm gonna go over here so that as I walk forward, woo. Okay, it doesn't like me doing that. So that's just a spacing thing, so we're gonna grab one of these. I say drag that back like so. And then we're gonna put our player there. So now as I move forward, I get locked onto that line, I come around, and I can't go in either direction. Why not? And it should be just at the end of there. We should be coming around just at the end of the square, and we should be... Are we not overlapping? We are not overlapping enough to touch boxes. I need to overlap enough to touch boxes. That's right, you want to touch the box. Hardy har har. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to make that a little bit longer. Oh. That is going the wrong way, so we're going to make that 50. Okay, fine. We're going to move that forward. Let's hope this works okay. Come on. Which track is that actually on? That's the problem with splines, is they can be a pain in the ass to fiddle about with. Okay, so yeah, that should do that. So moving here, I should hit there and then get put on the spline. Okay, so we should be working. Not quite sure why we aren't yet. Why are we not working? We add, and then we're going in the opposite direction, and then we're bouncing. So that is on this spline, which is this one. Yeah. should be walking into here and being put on the spline. But instead, we're just getting jiggled about a tad. And it probably has something to do with our function. Where is our function? Enter spline. What we're gonna do is we're gonna do a quick off this distance along spline. We're gonna hit print. Compile, save, play. So, why are we doing this? I'm gonna hit. We're getting 89 points along the spline. It's like it is trying to set us along the spline. Okay. Then we're going to hit print string on here. And we're going to get this distance along the spline. The difference is going to be this one. We're going to set to a short delay. And we're going to make it green. So this is our current distance. And this one, we're going to make pink. And we're going to make it hold on for longer. Let's say like 50 seconds. And what this is doing is printing a message on the screen with print string. I'm just gonna make this bigger here. So print string, you should see something come up in this corner. So we go to 80, and now we're trying to go longer, but we keep getting hit back to 2000. Why do we keep going bigger? Even though it's trying to set us to something else. So enter spline, we are setting distance on spline, yes. We're setting spline track. We're getting spline track. It'll be fine. And then we're getting our distance on spline. Yeah, like this should all be working. And it worked before we had two things. So let's get our second spline out of the way. If we just have one spline here. We are working except for when we hit the... Oh! I think I know part of the problem. Okay. Let's move these back. And we need to get them to overlap, so... something like... that, sure. Yeah, that'll overlap enough. Okay, on our character player, we need to go viewport. Our box, we want to scroll down to collisions, generate overlap events, no. And collision presets, no collision. Compile and save. Let's see if that does anything to help us out. No, we're still getting stuck. And let's then do, so spline track equals spline, yeah. If the spline track does not equal spline, it does enter spline. But if it does false. Let's do a print string here, off false, and we're gonna say already on spline. Oops, I got caps locks on, but that's fine. And then we're going to go back to our player, and we're going to get rid of these print strings that we set up on our enter spline function and on our input graph. I'm going to hit play. already on spline. Why are you not updating location? Event graph, set actor location, teleport. Distance along spline. Yes. So spline is valid. I'm going to print string, and we're going to print spline value there. Yeah, so it's trying to set a further distance on the spline, or a lesser distance on the spline. It just isn't updating. But when we go on the other spline, it's working. And then we come around, and we come around. Why is it just getting on that one spline as being a pain in our butts? Not this being too close or something stupid like that, right? Or this not being close enough. Let's try that. Okay, so for some reason, as soon as we get on here, it wants to send us backwards. Is that... That is my fault. Look at that. So, because I brought a spline point backwards, the starting spline point was still underneath it. And we're gonna grab that handle and... Oh no, is this also a spline point? That's also a spline point. Okay. So, now that we've got our spline unkinked and not wrapped on itself, now it works fine. Except for at this point where it tries to double enter things, but that's just setting an offset. And then we'll grab it there and move that onto there, and on our other spline, come on, other spline. Selecting the spline sometimes can be a pain in the butt. You might want to do something there. On our other spline, we're going to take the spline point and it also has a flippy dude spline point. So I did that mistake twice. Maybe. Yeah, it looks like it. Okay, so if I move this one over here, and I then take this one, and I want that to overlap with that. That should now, except for my character no longer overlaps with it when they start, so I need to move the character back. Move along the spline, get to the other end, switch to the new spline, move along the spline, get to the other end, switch to the new spline, and so on and so forth. And that little hitch now is only because these don't perfectly line up. That is just level design now. So that works. And if we select a spline box, and then under here we could select one of these, we can then scale those individually to make them bigger if need be, and all that fun stuff. And we should be able to move it along the spline in case we needed to set it somewhere other than where it gets automatically set to. So there is our spline movement. I had it correct, I just had a fun little adventure in the middle of not being able to figure out where I screwed up. So, thank you for watching. This is part 1. In our next part, we are going to set up a animation blueprint so that we've got a little running robot character to move along our splines instead of just a box. We'll see you then.